In December of 2019, 3 volunteers were searching a remote section of Redwood National Park that had been dismissed as too unlikely during the official search operations. The area was brutal, dense fern undergrowth, fallen logs blocking every path, and redwoods so tightly packed that sunlight barely reached the ground. At around 2:15 in the afternoon, Jennifer Briggs heard something strange. A soft, rhythmic tapping sound. Tap, tap, tap. She pushed through a wall of ferns and found a young woman kneeling beside the exposed roots of a fallen redwood. The woman was skeletal, her blonde hair matted with dirt and tree sap, her torn blue jacket hanging off her shoulders. She was clutching a hiking boot, brown leather, caked in mud, one lace missing, and tapping it against the tree root over and over. When Jennifer said her name, the woman slowly lifted her head. Her face was covered in scratches, her eyes bloodshot and unfocused, her lips cracked and bleeding. She stared at Jennifer, but didn't seem to see her. This was 23-year-old Emma Hartley, the same young woman who had vanished 28 days earlier with her identical twin sister, Sophie. And Sophie was nowhere to be found. Just this boot, held so tightly in Emma's hands that when paramedics tried to take it from her, she screamed like they were tearing away the last piece of her sister's soul. On November 3rd, 2019, a Sunday morning, the parking lot at Trillium Falls Trailhead in Redwood National Park was already filling up with cars. The weather was perfect for hiking, cool, but not cold, with a light fog drifting between the ancient trees that made everything look softer, almost dreamlike. Among the cars was a silver Honda CR-V with California plates. It belonged to Emma and Sophie Hartley, 23-year-old identical twins from Sacramento. If you saw them standing side by side, it would take you a moment to tell them apart. Both had straight blonde hair that fell just past their shoulders. Both had the same light blue eyes, the same narrow nose, the same quick smile that made people instantly like them. But spend 5 minutes with them, and you'd see the differences. Emma wore her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She had on a navy blue fleece jacket, gray hiking pants, and sturdy Merrell boots that were already broken in. Her backpack was organized. First aid kit, extra batteries, energy bars, and Ziploc bags, everything in its place. She was the planner, the careful one. Sophie's hair hung loose around her shoulders, catching the morning light. She wore a bright red windbreaker that rustled when she moved, faded jeans that were too tight for serious hiking, and brown leather boots she'd bought 2 weeks earlier that weren't broken in yet. Her backpack looked like she'd packed it in 30 seconds, a water bottle shoved in sideways, granola bars loose at the bottom, a rolled-up hoodie already falling out of the top. She was the spontaneous one, the adventurous one. This was their tradition. Every year on their birthday, November 2nd, they took a camping trip together. Just the two of them. No parents, no boyfriends, no friends tagging along. It was their time. This year, they planned to hike to Tall Trees Grove, one of the most remote and beautiful sections of the park, where some of the oldest redwoods still stood. They'd camp nearby, spend the night under the stars, hike back out the next morning. Their mother, Catherine Hartley, would later tell investigators that the girls had seemed excited that morning when they left. Normal. Happy. Sophie had called her around 9 a.m. to say they were heading out, that they'd check in when they got back to self-service. Catherine had told them to be safe, to stick to the marked trails, to call if they needed anything. The last thing Sophie said was, "Love you, Mom. See you tomorrow." According to park records, Emma and Sophie started their hike around 10:30 in the morning. The trail was well marked at first, a wide dirt path that wound gently upward through groves of younger redwoods and Douglas firs. The morning fog was starting to lift, and shafts of sunlight broke through the canopy, illuminating the forest floor in golden patches. At 11:45 a.m., another couple of hikers saw them near Lady Bird Johnson Grove, about 2 miles into the hike. The couple remembered them specifically because Sophie had asked to take their photo in front of a massive tree, and then they'd return the favor. Later, when investigators showed them pictures, the couple described the twins as happy, laughing, excited. Sophie had been talking about wanting to photograph a specific ancient tree she'd seen in a book. That was the last confirmed sighting of Emma and Sophie Hartley alive together. By 7 p.m., When the sun had set and the temperature had dropped into the low 40s, Catherine Hartley called the park rangers. The recording of that call would later be played in court. Her voice was steady at first, controlled, but you could hear the worry underneath like a crack running through ice. "My daughters were supposed to check in by 5 o'clock, she said. They're not answering their phones. Both phones are going straight to voicemail. This isn't like them. Emma always checks in. Always." The ranger on duty that night took down the information: names, ages, vehicle description, plan route. He told Catherine not to panic yet. That cell service in the park was spotty, that the girls had probably just lost track of time. But he also dispatched a team to the trailhead to check on the car. At 8 p.m., 2 rangers arrived at Trillium Falls parking lot. The silver Honda CR-V was still there, parked in the same spot where the girls had left it that morning. The rangers circled the car, shining their flashlights through the windows. Everything looked normal. Emma's purse was on the front seat. Sophie's denim jacket was draped over the back. Through the rear window, they could see camping gear, a tent, sleeping bags, a cooler. The car was locked. No signs of forced entry. No signs of struggle. Whatever had happened to Emma and Sophie, it had happened after they started hiking. By midnight, the first search teams were moving through the forest with powerful flashlights and headlamps, their beams cutting through the darkness like searchlights. They called the girls' names over and over. Emma, Sophie. The words echoed through the trees and faded into silence. No response, just the sound of wind moving through the canopy high above, a soft rushing that sounded almost like whispers. The temperature dropped to 38 degrees that night. If the girls were out there, injured or lost, hypothermia would start setting in. The next morning, at first light, the search operation expanded. Volunteers from Humboldt County Search and Rescue joined the park rangers. They brought tracking dogs, German shepherds trained to follow human scent. One of them, a dog named Ranger, picked up a trail along the main path heading toward Tall Trees Grove. He was eager, confident, pulling his handler forward with his nose pressed to the ground. But about 3 miles in, near a fork in the trail where a smaller, unmarked path split off toward a restricted area, the scent vanished. Just stopped. The dog circled the area, whining, confused. His handler, a man named Tom Berkeley who'd been working with search dogs for 15 years, had never seen anything like it. "It's like they just disappeared," he told the lead ranger. "Like they walked to this spot and then ceased to exist." There were few explanations for this. The girls could have crossed water, which would wash away their scent. They could have gotten into a vehicle, though that was impossible this deep in the forest. Or they could have moved into an area with such strong, competing smells, rotting vegetation, animal carcasses, something pungent, that the dog couldn't isolate their trail anymore. The search teams pressed on. They checked every established campsite within a 5-mile radius, every creek crossing, every shelter and rest area. A helicopter flew overhead with thermal imaging cameras, but the dense canopy made it almost useless. From above, all you could see was a solid roof of green, branches woven so tightly together that even heat signatures couldn't penetrate. By the end of the first week, over 100 volunteers had combed through the most accessible areas of the park. They'd found nothing. No torn clothing caught on branches. No dropped equipment. No footprints. No blood. Nothing. The second week, they expanded into more difficult terrain. Steep ravines where a fall could be fatal. Areas thick with rhododendrons and salal bushes where you had to crawl on your hands and knees. One ranger described these sections as nature's labyrinths, places where even experienced hikers could lose their sense of direction within minutes and wander in circles for hours. Still nothing. During the third week, the search moved into the restricted zones, sections of old-growth forests that were protected by federal law. These areas were rarely patrolled. The trails, if you could call them that, were overgrown and barely visible. Rangers avoided them because there was nothing there but ancient trees and silence. It was during one of these patrols that a ranger named Eric Lawson noticed something odd. He was checking an old logging road that hadn't been used in decades, now overgrown with ferns and blackberry bushes. But someone had driven through recently. The tire tracks were fresh, deep ruts in the soft earth, like the vehicle had been carrying something heavy. Eric noted it in his report. At the time, it seemed unrelated. People used old logging roads for all sorts of reasons. Hunters looking for deer, photographers scouting locations, people gathering firewood. It wasn't necessarily connected to the missing girls, but it was. They just didn't know it yet. By November 25th, 3 weeks after Emma and Sophie disappeared, the official search operation was scaled down. The park rangers held a press conference. Catherine Hartley stood beside the podium, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She held a framed photo of her daughters, both of them smiling, their arms around each other, taken just a month earlier at a friend's wedding. She tried to speak, to say something, but the words wouldn't come. All she could do was stand there, holding that photo, while a ranger spoke for her. While the active search is ending, the ranger said, "This case remains open. We urge anyone with information to come forward." For Catherine, this was the worst part. Not knowing, not having answers, not being able to bury her daughters or grieve properly because there was always that tiny, desperate hope that maybe they were still alive somewhere. Maybe they'd walked out of the forest and gotten disoriented. Maybe they'd found help in a nearby town. But as the days turned into weeks, that hope faded. The forest had swallowed her daughters whole, and it wasn't giving them back. December 1st, 2019, 28 days after Emma and Sophie Hartley vanished. A group of 5 volunteers from an organization called Redwood Rescue Alliance decided to search an area that had been marked as low priority during the official operation. It was a remote section north of Tall Trees Grove, accessible only by pushing through dense undergrowth with no real trail to follow. The kind of place where rangers rarely went because there was no reason to, just trees and silence and the occasional deer path. Jennifer Briggs, a retired park ranger who'd been volunteering with search and rescue teams for over a decade, was leading the group. She'd studied the topographic maps for hours, tracing every creek, every ridge, every possible route the girls might have taken if they'd gotten disoriented. Her theory was simple. People who are lost follow water. Water means a way out, a way down from the mountains, a source of life. There was a seasonal creek in this section, Fern Creek, named for the thick carpet of ferns that grew along its banks. During the rainy season, it was a rushing stream. Now, in early December, it was barely a trickle, but it was still there. The volunteers split up to cover more ground. Jennifer took the northern section, moving slowly along the creek bed. The rocks were slick with algae. The mud squelched under her boots. The air smelled damp and earthy, like decomposing leaves and wet bark. Overhead, the redwoods blocked out most of the sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight even in the middle of the afternoon. At around 2:15 p.m., Jennifer heard something that made her stop walking. A sound that didn't belong in the forest. Tap, tap, tap. It was faint, rhythmic like someone knocking on wood. Jennifer tilted her head, listening. The sound was coming from somewhere ahead, deeper into the grove. She pulled out her radio and called to the others. "Hold your positions," she said quietly. "I think I found something." She moved forward, pushing aside a wall of ferns that came up to her chest. The fronds were wet, and they soaked through her jacket as she passed. The tapping sound grew louder, clearer. The grove opened up into a small clearing where a massive redwood had fallen years ago. The trunk, easily 15 feet in diameter, was covered in a thick layer of moss and mushrooms. The roots, torn from the earth when the tree fell, stood upright like a jagged wooden wall. And there, kneeling at the base of those roots, was a figure. Jennifer's first thought was that it was a pile of discarded camping gear. But then the figure moved, and she realized it was a person, a young woman. She was skeletal. That was the first word that came to Jennifer's mind. The woman's body was folded in on itself, knees drawn up, shoulders hunched. Her blonde hair, which should have been bright in any light, was matted and dark, streaked with dirt, stuck together with tree sap, hanging in thick clumps that obscured her face. She wore a torn blue fleece jacket that was 3 sizes too big for her now, the fabric hanging off her frame like it was draped over a coat hanger. Her pants were shredded at the knees, stained with mud and what looked like dry blood. Her hands, pale, skeletal, covered in scratches and scabs, were clutching something against her chest. A boot, brown leather, caked in dried mud, one lace missing entirely, and she was tapping it against a tree root. Over and over. Tap, tap, tap. Jennifer approached slowly, carefully, like you would approach a wounded animal. She could see now that the woman's feet were bare except for one filthy sock. The other foot was covered in blisters and cuts, the skin raw and infected. "Emma," Jennifer said softly. The woman didn't respond. She continued the rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. Jennifer knelt down, her knees sinking into the wet moss. She was close enough now to see the woman's face, or what was left of it. The skin was stretched tight over her cheekbones, pale and waxy. There was a long, deep scratch running from her temple to her jaw, partially healed but infected, the edges red and swollen with pus. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, split open in multiple places. Her eyes, light blue, bloodshot, ringed with dark circles so deep they looked like bruises, stare at something beyond the trees, beyond the forest, beyond reality. "Emma," Jennifer said again, louder this time. "My name is Jennifer. I'm here to help you." Slowly, the woman lifted her head. Her eyes focused on Jennifer's face for just a moment, a flicker of recognition, maybe, or just confusion, and then slid away again, looking at nothing. Her mouth opened. A sound came out, raw and broken, barely a whisper. "Sophie." Jennifer's heart clenched. She reached out slowly and placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. The woman flinched, her entire body going rigid, but she didn't pull away. She was shaking, not from the cold, though the temperature was in the low 50s, but from something deeper. Shock, terror, something that had broken inside her and hadn't been put back together. Jennifer immediately grabbed her radio. "I found her," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Emma Hartley. She's alive, but we need medical right now." Within 10 minutes, the rest of the volunteer team had arrived. One of them was Robert Hayes, a trained EMT who'd worked search and rescue in 3 states. He knelt beside Emma, trying to assess her condition, but she wouldn't look at him, wouldn't respond to his questions. She just kept staring at that boot, clutching it tighter every time someone came near. Robert checked her vitals as best he could without moving her too much. Her pulse was weak and rapid, about 110 beats per minute. Her skin had no elasticity, a clear sign of severe dehydration. Her breathing was shallow. She had cuts and bruises across her entire body, some of them swollen and clearly infected. Her feet were in terrible shape, blistered, bleeding, the skin rubbed raw and peeling in places. She'd been walking through the forest for weeks with almost no protection. "Emma," Robert said gently, "can you hear me? Can you tell me if you're hurt anywhere?" No response. Emma's eyes remained fixed on the boot. Robert tried to take it from her just to examine her hands properly. The moment his fingers touched the leather, Emma's reaction was violent. She yanked the boot away, curling her body around it, and let out a sound. Not quite a scream, more like the noise an animal makes when it's cornered. Raw, primal, terrified. "Okay," Robert said quickly, raising his hands. "Okay, you can keep it. I'm sorry." They wrapped her in emergency blankets, the kind that looked like aluminum foil designed to trap body heat. One of the volunteers handed Robert a bottle of water. He held it to Emma's lips. "Just small sips," he said. Slow. Emma drank mechanically, like her body remembered what to do even if her mind didn't. Water dribbled down her chin. She didn't seem to notice. As they waited for the park rangers to arrive with a stretcher, Emma whispered something. The words were so quiet that Jennifer had to lean in close to hear them. "Green man saw us." Sophie ran. Jennifer glanced at Robert. He shook his head slightly, his expression grim. Emma wasn't making sense. Or maybe she was, and it was worse than they thought. It took another hour for the rangers to reach them with a stretcher. The terrain was too rough for any vehicle. They had to carry her out on foot, for men taking turns bearing the weight. Emma lay on the stretcher, still clutching the boot, her eyes half closed. Every few minutes, she would whisper something, fragments of words that didn't form complete sentences. Trees falling loud, so loud. Sophie screaming, couldn't find her. Blood on the ground, just the boot. Jennifer walked alongside the stretcher, watching Emma's face. She'd been doing search and rescue for over 10 years. She'd seen a lot of things. People who'd fallen off cliffs and survived. People who'd gotten lost and spent days in the wilderness. People who'd been attacked by animals. But she'd never seen someone who looked like this, physically present, but mentally somewhere else entirely, trapped in a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. By 4:30 p.m., they reached the nearest access road where an ambulance was waiting. The paramedics loaded Emma inside. One of them, a woman named Lisa Grant, tried again to take the boot for proper medical examination. Emma screamed, a raw, animal sound that made everyone within earshot freeze. Lisa backed off immediately. She found a clear plastic evidence bag and carefully placed it over the boot while Emma was still holding it, sealing the top loosely. See, Lisa said gently, it's still with you. We're just keeping it safe and clean. Okay. Emma looked down at the boot, now encased in plastic, and nodded almost imperceptibly. Her grip loosened slightly, but she didn't let go. The ambulance drove through the winding roads toward Crescent City, siren silent. No rush now that they knew Emma was stable enough for transport. Inside, Emma lay on the gurney, staring at the ceiling. Her lips moved occasionally, forming words no one could hear. At the hospital, the medical staff confirmed what the EMT had suspected. Severe dehydration. She'd lost so much fluid that her kidneys were on the verge of shutting down. Hypothermia, though her core temperature had stabilized at 95 degrees. Malnutrition. She'd lost nearly 20 pounds in 4 weeks. Multiple lacerations, many of them infected. Signs of prolonged exposure to the elements. But Emma would survive. Physically, at least. Dr. Caroline Mitchell, the psychiatrist called in to evaluate her, noted in her initial assessment that Emma was exhibiting classic signs of severe dissociative disorder. She responded to physical stimuli, flinching when nurses cleaned her wounds, drinking when water was offered, but she didn't respond to verbal questions. Her eyes tracked movement in the room, but there was no awareness behind them, no recognition of where she was or what was happening. The boot stayed with her. Even after they cleaned her up, changed her into a hospital gown, hooked her up to IVs and monitors, Emma kept the boot on the bed beside her. She would reach out every few minutes to touch it, her fingers tracing the leather, as if she needed constant confirmation that it was still there. A nurse tried to remove it once, thinking it was unsanitary. Emma's eyes flew open. She sat up, the first voluntary movement she'd made, and grabbed the boot with both hands, pressing it against her chest. She didn't speak, but the panic on her face was unmistakable. The nurse backed away. Okay, honey. Okay, you can keep it. That night, Emma lay in the hospital bed, the monitors beeping softly in the darkness. She held the boot against her chest like a child holding a teddy bear. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, and from her lips, barely audible, came a single word repeated over and over. Sophie, Sophie, Sophie. Somewhere in those mountains, Sophie Hartley was still out there. Dead or alive, the forest was keeping her. And Emma, even in her broken state, knew it. The question was, would anyone be able to find out what happened before Emma's mind shattered completely? Or would the truth stay buried in those ancient trees forever? While Emma lay in that hospital bed, clutching Sophie's boot and whispering her sister's name, a different kind of work was beginning. The boot that Emma refused to let go of wasn't just a piece of hiking gear anymore. It was evidence, and it might be the only key to finding out what happened to Sophie Hartley. Detective Maria Santos from the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office stood in the hospital hallway, arms crossed, watching through the window as nurses tried to calm Emma down. Maria was in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and brown eyes that had seen too much. She'd worked missing persons cases before, too many of them, and she knew what this was. Emma Hartley had survived something terrible, something that had broken her mind. And the boot she was holding, the boot she'd carried through 28 days of hell in those woods, was going to tell Maria exactly what that something was. We need that boot, Maria said to Dr. Mitchell, who was standing beside her. She won't let it go, Dr. Mitchell replied. Every time someone tries to take it, she has a complete breakdown. Then we explain it to her, Maria said. We tell her we're going to find Sophie. But we need the boot to do it. Dr. Mitchell nodded slowly. I'll try. It took 3 hours of careful, patient explaining before Emma finally, reluctantly, let them take the boot. Dr. Mitchell held Emma's hand while a nurse carefully removed it from her grip, placed it in a clear plastic evidence bag, and sealed it. Emma watched it go, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking. We'll bring it back, Dr. Mitchell said softly. I promise. We just need to look at it. To help Sophie. At the word Sophie, Emma's eyes flickered with something, recognition, maybe, or hope. She nodded just barely. The boot was transported to the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office forensics lab. Maria followed in her car, the evidence bag sitting on the passenger seat beside her. She kept glancing at it at red lights, this worn brown leather boot that had somehow become the center of everything. Derek Walsh, the forensic technician, was already waiting when Maria arrived. He was young, maybe 30, with the careful, methodical demeanor of someone who understood that every detail mattered, that one missed fiber or overlooked stain could mean the difference between solving a case and letting a killer go free. He put on gloves, set up his camera, and carefully removed the boot from the evidence bag. Under the bright lights of the examination table, it looked even worse than it had in the forest. Caked in dried mud, scuffed and scratched, one lace missing entirely, the other hanging loose and frayed. Derek photographed it from every angle, the camera's shutter clicking rhythmically. Then he began his examination. The first thing he noticed made him pause. Detective, he said quietly, come look at this. Maria leaned over the table. Derek was pointing to a spot on the side of the boot, just above the ankle. That's not a tear, Derek said. That's a cut. Maria looked closer. He was right. The leather had been sliced clean through, a straight line about 2 inches long. The edges were sharp, precise. Knife, Maria said. 4 to 6 inch blade, Derek confirmed. Fixed blade, probably. Something you'd use for hunting or field dressing game. You use a magnifying glass to examine the cut more closely. And look here, it goes all the way through. He carefully opened the cut with tweezers. Inside, caught in the layers of leather and lining, were tiny fibers. White and gray, matted together. Derek extracted them carefully and placed them in a small evidence bag. Sock fibers, he said. Whoever was wearing this boot when it got cut, the blade went through the boot, through their sock, probably into their skin. Maria felt her stomach tighten. Keep going. Derek turned the boot over, examining the sole. The tread was worn but intact. Embedded in the grooves were all the things you'd expect. Dirt, small pebbles, bits of organic matter. Pine needles, moss, fragments of leaves. He scraped samples from different sections, placing each one in a separate container for analysis. We can match the soil composition to specific areas of the park, he said. Might tell us where she was walking before. He trailed off, not wanting to finish the sentence. Then he examined the interior of the boot. This was where things got worse. The inside was stained dark brown. Old blood, dried and crusted into the fabric lining. Derek swabbed it carefully, collecting multiple samples. Significant blood loss, he said quietly. I'd estimate at least 100 milliliters soaked into the boot lining. We'll run DNA, but... He looked at Maria. We both know whose it's going to be. Maria nodded, her jaw tight. What else? Derek examined the tongue of the boot, the area where the laces would have been threaded and tied. There were more fibers here, but different from the sock fibers. These were darker, coarser, synthetic-looking. He placed one under the microscope and studied it for a long moment. Rope, he said. Nylon or polypropylene. The kind you'd use for climbing or securing loads in a truck or... He paused. Or restraining someone. Maria closed her eyes briefly. Jesus. There's more, Derek said. He'd moved to the heel of the boot now. See this smudge? He pointed to a dark, greasy stain on the leather. That's not mud. That's some kind of oil or lubricant. He carefully scraped a sample and placed it on a slide. Under the microscope, it had a distinctive amber color and viscous texture. He ran it through a quick chemical analysis using test strips and solvents. 20 minutes later, he had an answer. Chainsaw bar oil, Derek said, looking up at Maria. the specific type used for heavy-duty forestry work. This brand, he checked his notes, is called Husqvarna. It's what professional loggers use. Maria stood there, letting the pieces fall into place in her mind. A knife cut through the boot and into Sophie's foot. Rope fibers, suggesting someone had been tied up or restrained. And chainsaw oil, meaning whoever had done this had been operating a chainsaw recently. In a national park where logging was illegal. Emma said something. Maria said quietly. When they found her, she kept saying green man and trees falling. Derek looked at her. She saw someone cutting trees. And they saw her and her sister. And they couldn't let them leave, Maria finished. The forensic examination took 6 hours total. Derek compiled his findings into a detailed report, complete with photographs and diagrams. Maria read it sitting at her desk in the sheriff's office at 2 in the morning, a cold cup of coffee beside her. The cut in the leather was consistent with a hunting knife, probably 4 to 6 inches long with a fixed blade. The blood inside matched Sophie Hartley's type. O negative, though they were still waiting on DNA confirmation. The sock fibers proved the blade had penetrated through the boot. The rope fibers suggested someone had used restraints, though whether to tie Sophie up or to secure equipment nearby wasn't clear. And the chainsaw oil was the final piece. Whoever had cut trees illegally in that forest had also cut Sophie's boot off her foot. The question was, why just the boot? Where was Sophie? And what had happened that made Emma run into the forest alone, carrying nothing but her sister's boot, and survive for 28 days on sheer instinct? Maria called the Park Service the next morning and requested records of every reported logging violation in the past 5 years. What came back was a file 3 inches thick. Redwood poaching was a bigger problem than most people realized. The wood was valuable. Certain burls could sell for $15,000 or $20,000 on the black market. The trees were protected, which made them even more attractive to criminals. And the remote areas of the park made it easy to work undetected if you knew where to go and when. One name appeared multiple times in the violation reports, Caleb Rourke. Maria pulled his file. Rourke was 43, white male, lived in the small town of Orick about 15 miles from the park. He'd been fined twice for illegal tree cutting, once in 2017 and again in 2018. Both times, he'd paid the fine and disappeared. Rangers suspected he was still operating, but they'd never caught him in the act again. He was smart, careful. He knew the forest like his own backyard. Rourke's DMV record showed he owned a green Ford F-250 pickup truck. Maria felt something click in her mind. Green. Emma had said green man. What if she hadn't meant his clothing? What if she'd seen a green truck? Maria ran Rourke's known associates. One name came up repeatedly. Dylan Marsh, age 38, also from Orick. Marsh had been arrested for deer poaching in 2016, but released on a technicality. According to Ranger reports, Rourke and Marsh were often seen together on the old logging roads that cut through the less-traveled sections of the park. Maria assembled a team, 4 deputies, 2 park rangers, and a forensic specialist, and drove to Redwood National Park. They weren't looking for lost hikers anymore. They were looking for a crime scene. Emma had been found near Fern Creek. If she'd been running, trying to get away from something, she would have been moving downhill, following water, which meant whatever she was running for was uphill. Higher in the mountains, deeper in the forest. They started their search 300 yards upstream from where Emma had been discovered. The terrain was brutal, steep slopes covered in ferns and fallen logs, redwoods so close together that you had to squeeze between them sideways. Every 20 feet, they'd stop and mark their position on GPS, creating a grid pattern that would let them cover the area systematically. On the second day, Deputy Travis Coleman found something. He'd been working his way up a particularly steep section, grabbing fern fronds to pull himself forward, when he broke through into a small clearing. It wasn't much, maybe 30 feet across, surrounded on all sides by massive trees and dense undergrowth. But something about it felt wrong. The ground was disturbed. Not obviously, but if you looked carefully, you could see it. Drag marks in the dirt, partially hidden by fallen leaves. Broken fern stems that hadn't grown back. And in the center of the clearing, near a cluster of gray boulders, there was a stain on the ground that was darker than the surrounding soil. Detective, Travis called out. I got something. Maria made her way up the slope, her boots slipping on the wet ground. When she reached the clearing, she saw what Travis was pointing at. Blood, old and faded by rain, but unmistakable. They cordoned off the area immediately, stringing yellow caution tape between trees. The forensic specialist, a woman named Angela Reeves, began her examination. She worked slowly, methodically, photographing every inch of the clearing before touching anything. Within an hour, she found the story written in the evidence. The blood spatter on the ferns showed a pattern consistent with blunt force trauma, someone being struck with a heavy object. There were broken branches at about 5 feet high, the kind of damage you'd see if someone grabbed them while falling or being pushed. Scattered throughout the clearing were boot prints in the dried mud. Men's size 11 work boots with heavy treads. Definitely not Sophie's or Emma's. Near the edge of the clearing, Angela found cigarette butts. 4 of them, all the same brand, American Spirit Blue Pack. She collected them carefully for DNA analysis. But the most damning evidence was the chainsaw work. On a fallen log at the eastern edge of the clearing, there were fresh cuts. Clean, straight lines where someone had been sectioning the wood, testing their blade. Scattered around the log were wood shavings, curled ribbons of reddish-brown wood that looked almost beautiful in the dappled sunlight. Angela collected samples of the shavings and sealed them in evidence bags. Later analysis would confirm what Maria already suspected: old-growth redwood. Federally protected. Illegal to harvest. Worth a fortune. Someone was here cutting trees, Maria said, standing in the center of the clearing. Emma and Sophie walked in on them. And whoever was here didn't want witnesses. But there was still one critical piece missing. Sophie's body. They brought in cadaver dogs, 2 German shepherds trained specifically to detect human remains. The dogs worked the area in expanding circles, their handlers guiding them through the dense undergrowth. After 3 hours, one of them, a dog named Atlas, alerted near a steep ravine about 200 yards from the clearing. The handler marked the spot with a flag. The team moved in, carefully examining the area. There were signs that someone had been here. More disturbed ground, broken branches. But when they excavated the area, removing layers of soil and leaf litter, they found nothing. The dog's handler, Rachel Moss, knelt down and ran her hand through the dirt. The scent is here, she said. She was definitely here at some point, but she's not anymore. Maria stood at the edge of the ravine, looking down into the tangle of ferns and fallen trees below. The forest was so dense here, you could hide anything, a body, a vehicle, evidence, and it would never be found unless you knew exactly where to look. Whoever had killed Sophie Hartley had moved her, taken her somewhere else, somewhere they thought was safe. Maria pulled out her phone and made a call. I need soil analysis expedited, she told the lab. And I need every record you can find on Caleb Rourke and Dylan Marsh. Property records, vehicle registrations, utility bills, everything. If they own land or rent storage space anywhere in this county, I want to know about it. She hung up and looked at her team, standing in the clearing surrounded by evidence of violence. Someone in this area knows what happened here, Maria said. They've known for almost a month, and they thought they got away with it. She looked back at the blood stain on the ground, now marked with a yellow evidence flag. But they didn't count on one thing, she said quietly. They didn't count on Emma Hartley surviving, and they definitely didn't count on her bringing that boot back with her. The forest had tried to keep it secret, but secrets carved in blood and chainsaw oil have a way of coming to light. Now the question was, could they find Sophie's body before whoever put it there had a chance to move it again? Back at Crescent City Hospital, Emma Hartley was slowly surfacing from the dark place her mind had retreated to. It wasn't a sudden awakening. It was more like watching someone climb out of a deep well, hand over hand, stopping to rest on each rung, not sure if they had the strength to keep going. Dr. Caroline Mitchell had been sitting with Emma every day for a week now, sometimes in silence, sometimes speaking softly about nothing in particular, the weather, the flowers in the vase by the window, the sound of rain on the roof. She didn't push, didn't ask questions. She just let Emma know, over and over, that she was safe now, that no one was going to hurt her, that she could take all the time she needed. On the 8th day, Emma spoke. I couldn't find her. Dr. Mitchell looked up from the book she'd been reading. Emma was sitting in a hospital bed, knees drawn to her chest, staring at her hands. Her blonde hair had been washed and brushed by the nurses, and it hung loose around her shoulders, making her look younger than 23. Fragile, almost childlike. "Find who, Emma?" Dr. Mitchell asked gently, though she already knew the answer. "Sophie." Emma's voice was barely audible. I looked everywhere. I kept looking, but I couldn't find her. Dr. Mitchell moved her chair closer to the bed. "Can you tell me what you remember?" Emma was quiet for a long time. Her fingers twisted in the thin hospital blanket, picking at loose threads. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, detached, as if she was describing something that had happened to someone else a long time ago. "We heard a noise," Emma said. "It was loud, like buzzing. Really loud buzzing that got inside your head and made your teeth hurt. Sophie thought it was a plane or something, but it wasn't moving. It was just there in one place, getting louder." "What did you do?" Dr. Mitchell asked. "I wanted to keep walking, to stay on the trail." "But Sophie," Emma's voice cracked slightly. "Sophie wanted to see what it was. She said it would just take a minute. She said we were probably close to a logging operation or something, and she wanted to get pictures." Dr. Mitchell nodded, writing notes on her pad. "So you went toward the sound." "We went off the trail," Emma said. "Just a little way, following the noise. And then we saw them." "Saw who?" Emma closed her eyes, her face scrunched up with the effort of remembering. "Two men. They were in a clearing. One of them was holding a chainsaw. It was so loud. That's what we'd been hearing. He was cutting into this huge tree, like bigger around than our car. The other man was standing there watching, smoking a cigarette." "What do the men look like?" Dr. Mitchell asked carefully. "The one with the chainsaw. I don't remember his face. He had his back to us. But the other one..." Emma's hands stopped moving. Her whole body went rigid. "He was big, tall. He was wearing a dark green shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He had a beard, brown beard, and he saw us." "What happened when he saw you?" "He yelled something. I couldn't hear it over the chainsaw, but I could see his mouth moving. He looked angry, really angry, and he started walking toward us." Emma's breathing was getting faster, shallow. Sophie grabbed my hand. She said we should go. She said we should run, but I couldn't move. I just stood there like an idiot, and he kept coming closer. Dr. Mitchell waited, letting Emma take her time. Sophie pulled me. Emma continued, tears starting to slide down her face. She pulled my hand, and we started running back the way we came. But we couldn't find the trail. Everything looked the same. The trees, the ferns, it all looked exactly the same no matter which way we turned. And I could hear them behind us, yelling, crashing through the bushes. They were chasing us. Emma's hands moved to her chest, gripping the fabric of her hospital gown. Sophie was faster than me. She's always been faster. She was ahead of me, and I was trying to keep up, but my legs felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. And then she screamed. I looked up, and she was on the ground. She'd tripped over a root or something. And her boot was stuck. She was trying to pull her foot out, yanking on it, but it wouldn't come free. "What did you do?" Dr. Mitchell asked softly. I heard them getting closer. Footsteps, breaking branches. And Sophie looked at me, and she said, Emma's voice broke completely. She said, "Run, Emma. Just run." And I ran. I left her there. I ran, and I hid behind a tree, and I put my hands over my mouth so they wouldn't hear me breathing. "Emma, listen to me," Dr. Mitchell said firmly. "What you did was survive. Your brain made a split-second decision to protect you. That doesn't make you a bad person. That makes you human." But Emma was shaking her head violently. No, I should have stayed. I should have helped her get her boot free. But I was so scared. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. I just hid there like a coward, and I listened to my sister screaming my name. "What did you hear?" Dr. Mitchell asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Emma's face crumpled. She was screaming, "Emma, help me. Emma, please." And then I heard something hit something. A heavy sound, like when you drop a hammer on wood. And Sophie stopped screaming. The room was silent except for Emma's ragged breathing and quiet sobs. "How long did you hide?" Dr. Mitchell asked after a moment. "I don't know. It felt like forever, but it was probably just a few minutes. When I couldn't hear them anymore, The footsteps, the yelling. I crawled back to where Sophie had fallen. Was she there? Emma shook her head. She was gone. But her boot was there, just lying in the dirt. And there was blood, dark red blood soaking into the ground. And marks in the dirt, like someone had dragged something heavy. Did you try to follow the marks? I tried, Emma whispered. I followed them for a while, but they just disappeared into the forest. And it was getting dark, and I was lost. I couldn't find a trail. I couldn't find a clearing again. I just kept walking in circles. Over the next several days, more fragments emerged. Emma's memories were scattered, non-linear, like pieces of a puzzle dumped out of a box with no picture on the front to guide you. Dr. Mitchell collected each piece carefully, writing them down, trying to build a timeline. Emma remembered the cold. The bone-deep, soul-crushing cold that set in every night when the temperature dropped, and she had nothing but her torn fleece jacket and Sophie's boot to hold against her chest. She remembered curling up in hollow logs, covering herself with fern fronds, shivering so hard her teeth cracked together. She remembered the thirst, how it felt like her throat was full of sand, like her tongue had swollen to twice its normal size. She drank from streams, cupping the icy water in her hands, not caring if it made her sick. Sometimes it did. She would vomit it back up and drink more anyway because the alternative was worse. She remembered the hunger, how it gnawed at her insides like a living thing. She ate berries. Some of them made her violently ill, but she kept eating them because she didn't know what else to do. She tried eating fern fronds once. They made her retch so hard she thought she'd die right there. She remembered the fear, constant, suffocating fear that was worse than the cold or the hunger or the thirst. Every sound made her freeze. The snap of a branch, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of an owl. She thought they were still out there, the men from the clearing. She thought they were hunting her, tracking her, waiting for her to make a mistake. And she remembered going back. Over and over, day after day, she tried to find the clearing again. Tried to find Sophie. She walked for hours, convinced she was going in the right direction, only to end up at the same creek she'd already passed 3 times. The forest was a maze with no exit. She kept the boot the entire time. Couldn't explain why, even to herself. It just felt important. Like if she had the boot, Sophie wasn't completely gone. Like maybe if she just kept looking, kept walking, she'd find her sister and give her the boot back and they'd laugh about how scared they'd been. But she never found her. And eventually, she couldn't remember why she was walking anymore. Couldn't remember what she was looking for. She just walked because that's what you do. You walk until you can't walk anymore, and then you walk some more. Detective Maria Santos was present for some of these sessions, sitting quietly in the corner of the hospital room, taking notes. After one particularly difficult session where Emma broke down completely, sobbing so hard the nurses had to sedate her, Maria stepped outside with Dr. Mitchell. "Can we use any of this?" Maria asked. In court, Dr. Mitchell sighed. Her memories are fragmented. Trauma does that. The brain protects itself by scrambling the timeline, burying details that are too painful to process. A defense attorney would tear her apart on the stand. But factually, Maria pressed. "Do you believe her?" Every word, Dr. Mitchell said without hesitation. The details are too specific, too raw. You can't fake that kind of trauma. She saw what she says she saw. Maria nodded slowly. The man in the green shirt. Tall, bearded. That matches Caleb Rourke. And the chainsaw, Dr. Mitchell added. That matches the evidence you found at the clearing. "We need to find Rourke's property," Maria said, already pulling out her phone. "If he and his partner buried Sophie somewhere, it's going to be on land they control, somewhere they feel safe." She made the call standing in the hospital hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. "I need everything you have on Caleb Rourke. Property records, rental agreements, storage units. I want to know every square foot of land that man has access to." The answer came back 3 hours later. Caleb Rourke owned a single-story house on 2 acres in Oric. The property backed up to a dense section of forest, no neighbors within a quarter mile. It was isolated, private, the perfect place to hide evidence. Maria assembled her team at dawn the next morning. For deputies, 2 forensic specialists, and a search warrant signed by a judge who'd been woken up at 5 a.m. and wasn't happy about it, but understood the urgency. They drove to Oric in 3 vehicles, moving fast but without sirens. The last thing Maria wanted was to give Rourke advance warning. If Sophie's body was on that property, they needed to find it before anyone had a chance to move it. Rourke's house appeared through the morning fog like something out of a horror movie. Single story, sagging roof, peeling paint. The yard was cluttered with rusted equipment, old tires, piles of scrap lumber. Parked in the driveway was a green Ford F-250 pickup truck. Maria felt her pulse quicken. "That's it," she said quietly. "That's the truck." They approached on foot, weapons drawn, but held low. Maria knocked on the front door. "Caleb Rourke, Sheriff's Department. We have a warrant." No answer. She knocked again, louder. "Caleb Rourke, open the door." Still nothing. Maria gave the signal. 2 deputies used a battering ram on the door. It splintered open on the second hit. Caleb Rourke was in the kitchen, standing by the sink with a cup of coffee in his hand. When he saw the deputies flooding into his house, he dropped the cup. It shattered on the floor, and he ran. He bolted for the back door, but 2 deputies were already there. They tackled him in the yard, face first into the dirt. He fought, kicking and swearing, but it was over in seconds. They cuffed him and dragged him to his feet. "Where's Dylan Marsh?" Maria demanded. Rourke spat blood into the grass. "Go to hell." They found Dylan Marsh 10 minutes later, hiding in a shed behind the house, wedged between 2 stacks of lumber. He came out with his hands up, shaking, crying, begging them not to shoot. Both men were placed in the back of separate patrol cars while the search of the property began. Maria went straight to the garage. The doors were padlocked, but they cut through the lock with bolt cutters. Inside, the garage smelled like motor oil and sawdust. There were chainsaws lined up on a workbench, 4 of them, various sizes. Next to them were axes, knives, coils of rope. And in the corner, containers of Husqvarna chainsaw oil. Maria photographed everything, but she knew the real evidence was outside. She walked around to the back of the house. The property extended into a thick section of pine and fir trees. The grass was patchy, brown in some places, non-existent in others. And there, near a cluster of pine trees about 50 yards from the house, the ground looked wrong. The dirt was a different color, darker, fresher. The grass around it was sparse, like it had been dug up and replanted, but hadn't taken root properly. Maria called the cadaver dogs. Atlas, the same German shepherd who'd alerted at the ravine in the park, went straight to the spot. He sat down, looked at his handler, and barked once. The signal for human remains. "Start digging," Maria said quietly. They used shovels at first, removing the topsoil carefully. 3 feet down, they hit something solid. Not rock, something wrapped in plastic. A blue tarp. The forensic team took over, excavating carefully, documenting every layer. They lifted the tarp and unrolled it slowly. Inside was Sophie Hartley. She was wearing the red windbreaker she'd put on that morning in November when the world was still normal and her biggest concern was getting good photos of old trees. Her blonde hair was matted with dirt. Her face was turned to the side, eyes closed, like she was sleeping. Her right foot still had its hiking boot on. Her left foot was bare. Maria stood there, looking down at this young woman who should have been planning her future, maybe grad school or a first real job, or traveling the world with her sister. Instead, she was buried in a shallow grave in Caleb Rourke's backyard because she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to see. The medical examiner arrived an hour later. Preliminary findings: blunt force trauma to the back of the head, consistent with being struck with a heavy object. Multiple stab wounds to the chest and abdomen, inflicted post-mortem. Time of death: approximately 28 to 30 days prior. Maria pulled out her phone and made the call she'd been dreading. "Dr. Mitchell? It's Detective Santos. We found her. We found Sophie Hartley." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, "I'll tell Emma." "Wait," Maria said. "There's something else. Tell her. Tell her that Sophie wasn't alone at the end. Tell her that her sister was still holding on to her, still thinking about her. Because Emma had Sophie's boot. And that means Sophie's last thought was probably of her twin sister trying to save her. It wasn't much comfort, but it was all Maria had to give. The interrogation of Caleb Rourke took place in a small room at the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, a metal table bolted to the floor. Rourke sat across from Maria Santos, his lawyer beside him, a public defender who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Maria laid out the evidence piece by piece, watching Rourke's face for any reaction. The chainsaw oil on Sophie's boot, the DNA from the cigarette butts matching his profile, the blood in his truck, the body buried in his backyard. Each piece of evidence was like another nail in a coffin that was already sealed shut. "You want to know what I think happened?" Maria said, leaning forward. "I think you and Dylan were cutting trees illegally. Old-growth redwoods worth tens of thousands of dollars. You'd probably been doing it for years, making good money, staying off the radar. But on November 3rd, your luck ran out. Two young women walked into your clearing. They saw what you were doing, and you panicked." Rourke stared at the table, jaw clenched. "Here's what's going to happen," Maria continued. "We have enough evidence to charge both you and Dylan with first-degree murder. That's life in prison without possibility of parole. But if you tell me exactly what happened, if you give me the truth, I'll talk to the DA about reducing the charges. Not much, but enough that you might see daylight again before you die." Rourke's lawyer leaned over and whispered something in his ear. He nodded slowly. When he spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reading from script. "We were working," he said, "cutting a burl off one of the old trees. Good money. $20,000 for that one piece. Nobody gets hurt because nobody's supposed to be in that part of the park. But then these two girls showed up, just walked right into the clearing like they owned the place. So you killed them," Maria said. "Dylan panicked," Rourke said. "I told him to just let them go, scare them a little, make sure they knew to keep their mouths shut. But Dylan, he's got a temper. He went after them, chased them down. And then what?" Rourke shifted in his seat. "One of them, the one in the red jacket, she tripped. Fell hard. Dylan caught up to her. She was screaming, trying to get away. Her boot was stuck on something, and she was yanking on it, pulling. Dylan grabbed her, and she started fighting him. Scratching, kicking. He hit her with the back of his axe. Just once. She went down and didn't get up. And Emma, the other sister, she ran. We looked for her, but the forest is big. Figured she'd either die out there or she'd be too scared to talk. People go missing in the park all the time." "What did you do with Sophie's body?" Rourke was quiet for a moment. "We took her back to my place that night. Buried her in the backyard. Dylan cut her boot off because it was stuck and we needed to move fast." Maria leaned back, letting the confession hang in the air. "You buried a 23-year-old woman in your backyard because she saw you cutting down a tree." Rourke met her eyes for the first time. It was a good tree, worth 20 grand, easy. Maria felt something cold settle in her chest. Not anger, not disgust, just a kind of numb horror at how casually this man could talk about murder. Like Sophie Hartley was nothing more than an inconvenience, a problem to be solved and buried and forgotten. Dylan Marsh's confession was almost identical, except he tried to put more blame on Rourke. Said it was Rourke's idea to chase the girls. Rourke had decided they couldn't let them go. But the physical evidence told a different story. The blood spatter patterns at the clearing showed that Dylan had been the one holding the weapon when Sophie was struck. He was the one who killed her. In the end, it didn't matter who blamed whom. Both men were charged with first-degree murder. The trial would come later, but everyone knew how it would end. The evidence was overwhelming. They would spend the rest of their lives in prison. When Maria went to the hospital to tell Emma, she brought the boot with her. Both boots now. They found Sophie's right boot still on her foot when they exhumed the body. She'd had them cleaned, preserved, placed in a clear box. Emma was sitting on the edge of her hospital bed when Maria arrived. She looked better, still thin, still haunted, but more present somehow. More aware. "We found her," Maria said quietly. "We found Sophie." Emma nodded slowly. "I know. Dr. Mitchell told me." Her voice was steady, but her hands were trembling. "Where was she?" "At the property belonging to the men who did this. They've been arrested. They confessed. They're going to prison for the rest of their lives." Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, was it fast? Maria had spent 15 years learning how to lie when necessary, how to comfort grieving families with gentle fictions. But looking at Emma now, this young woman who had survived 4 weeks alone in the wilderness, who had held onto her sister's boot through every nightmare, Maria couldn't bring herself to lie. No, she said honestly, but it was final. She didn't suffer long. Emma closed her eyes. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Can I see her? Not yet. The medical examiner still needs to complete the autopsy. But after that, yes, we'll arrange it. Maria set the box on the bed beside Emma. These are Sophie's boots. I thought you might want them. Emma looked at the box, at the boots visible through the clear plastic. She reached out slowly and touched the lid, her fingers tracing the outline of the brown leather she'd carried through hell. They're together now, Emma whispered. Both boots. Yes, Maria said. Emma looked up at Maria. That doesn't bring her back. No, Maria agreed. It doesn't. They sat in silence for a while, the hospital sounds drifting in from the hallway, distant voices, the beep of monitors, the squeak of shoes on linoleum. Outside the window, rain had started to fall, pattering softly against the glass. I should have stayed with her, Emma said finally. If I had stayed, maybe... If you had stayed, Maria interrupted gently, we'd be burying both of you. You survived, Emma. That's not something to feel guilty about. But Emma shook her head. Part of me is still there, in those trees, with her. I don't think that part is ever coming back. Maria didn't have an answer for that, because Emma was right. You could rescue someone's body, but their mind? Sometimes it stayed lost. Emma was released from the hospital 2 weeks later. She moved back to Sacramento, back to her parents' house, back to a room that had once held 2 beds, 2 desks, 2 lives running in parallel. Now there was only one. The trial of Caleb Rourke and Dylan Marsh lasted 3 months. Emma testified, her voice steady as she described the clearing, the men, the moment Sophie fell and told her to run. She told the jury about the 28 days she spent alone, surviving on instinct and creek water and the desperate hope that if she just kept looking, she'd find her sister alive. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Both men were convicted of first-degree murder. Life in prison without possibility of parole. Emma didn't attend the sentencing. By then, she'd already left California, moved to a small town in Montana near Glacier National Park. She got a job at the local library, lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with a view of the mountains. She never went hiking again, never set foot in a forest. The sight of redwood furniture in stores made her feel sick. But she kept the boots. Both of them, cleaned and preserved, sitting on a shelf in her living room. Sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep, she would take them down and hold them, running her fingers over the leather, remembering the last morning she and Sophie had been together, the last time they'd been whole. The truth didn't bring Sophie back. It never could, but gave Emma something she desperately needed, permission to stop searching, to stop listening for her sister's voice in the rustling of leaves. To stop seeing her face in every crowd, in every reflection, in every dream. The forest had taken Sophie, but couldn't keep Emma anymore. She found her way out, not because she was strong or brave or anything special, but because she'd finally forgiven herself for the only thing she could have done that day. She'd survived, and sometimes, in a world that takes everything, survival is the only victory that matters.